Welcome, Bitcoiners. Welcome, welcome, welcome. The sun is indeed up. Bitcoin running despite the really big blocks. I saw a 2 megabyte block today, but who cares? It's running. They're valid transactions. We're good. We're good. All that's left to do is have a coffee and talk about what's new. Perfect. All right. I'm going to warn you. Don't know why this is happening. But my iPad, where I normally keep all of my screenshots that I use as notes, I used to print them out. I still would prefer to print them out, but printers on the island are not great. Ink, not always obvious. So I don't know why. I create a shared album out of all the screenshots that I use, and it's not showing up on my iPad today. And I use my phone where I created the album as the camera. So help, just have a bit of patience while I navigate some of this stuff because it might be annoying. I'm going off my entire photo feed, and so there's other pictures and stuff I didn't take and stories I didn't use. So I'm going to look one more time and see if it's loaded, and that would do me a big favor, but it looks like it's just not going to happen. Oh well, I don't know why it was having trouble. But it's fine. The simulation winked at us yesterday. It winked at us. How? Well, you remember I brought up Luke Zaleski, right? The Zaleski guy, as an example of cognitive dissonance, as an example of mind reading as a tell, right? If you are experiencing cognitive dissonance, one of the refuges of the people whose brains are in the process of breaking is to mind read the other person and say, well, I understand everything because I actually have a special privileged insight into this person's brain and I know what they're thinking. And that usually allows people to maintain their narrative and not have to face that their entire construct of what they're seeing is wrong and needs to be re-evaluated, reconstructed, and rebuilt. People don't want to do that. We're a little bit lazy, all of us. And Joe says, I trust your brain, Nolan. Thank you. But even I am susceptible to this stuff, right? Everybody is. That's kind of what we're saying here. We can all have, like, even if, for example, if Bitcoin broke, right? Now, we say at the beginning of every one of these shows, Bitcoin's running, da, da, da. But even if there was some issue, I mean, I believe in it so much that I would refuse at, the whatever last hope there is to keep it alive, I would bet on that, even if the facts in front of me were that it's broken, right? Just as an example, it's an extreme example, but I'm just letting you know that we're all susceptible to it, right? So trust my brain, Joe. That's, we're gonna show our work here. That's what we do. We show our work. So that's the best we can do. We can just show our work and let everyone see it live, do it themselves. And absolutely, I'm doing my best and oriented towards helping you and sharing how I help myself. But we can all just understand that there are limits to how we operate. But let's go. So Luke Zaleski. He's the fella who had this mind reading. And by the way, you can, once you understand mind reading, you can actually prevent yourself. So you can control your cognitive dissonance better. You can almost self-diagnose it, even though that's not exactly a thing. But if you understand that you've had to resort to mind reading, you're like the scoundrels who are trying to get out of reimagining the things they had already settled in their mind. Right. So that's just the way it is. So Luke Zaleski starts arguing and doing his thing yesterday. And who replies but Elon Musk? What did Elon Musk tell him? Right. So we were just saying yesterday, we used the guy as an example of cognitive dissonance, of propaganda being pushed and all these kinds of things. And, Elon comes out and says, you're a master of propaganda. Now, here's where we're already getting into this note trouble. Let me find it. I saved it, and now I'm having a bit of... Oh, yeah, here it is. So he comes out and says, that's amazing. All that, and yet Twitter is still a hellscape of right-wing propaganda, lies, and misinformation pushed by AI and bots for Putin and MAGA. And Elon is an expert in propaganda. So that was his reply. But here's the funny, right? This is why it's the fakest news of the day. I am an expert in yours. He means his propaganda. Yeah. I'm an expert in yours. Yeah. And I'm an expert in journalism. He's an expert in journalism. Something you're not. Maybe stick to rocket science to stop the bots and MAGA baiting anti-woke virus nonsense and act like someone with a brain interested in running a social media site responsibly for everyone. peace. That was his whole thing. If you can sort him, he has this run-on sentence problem, which is in all of his writing somehow. But here it is again, right? I'll read it again just so you get a sense of the quality of his thinking, right? I am an expert in yours, yeah. And I am an expert in journalism, something you're not. Maybe stick to rocket science or stop the bots and MAGA baiting anti-woke virus nonsense and act like someone with a brain interested in running a social media site responsibly for everyone. Peace. It's amazing. I mean, it's amazing, right? But Sai Mehdi had probably the best response to this. He says, imagine thinking I'm an expert in journalism while you're only an expert in rocket science, and that was a flex. That's pretty good. imagine you think I'm an expert. He even says it out loud. I'm an expert in journalism. That's amazing. I'm an expert in journalism. Imagine in the world that we live in right now, where the whole expert class is being questioned, as well as journalism. No one thinks there's like expert journalists, right? There's journalists and not journalists, but no one is out there. He's an expert journalist. This guy's mixing two of the most ridiculous concepts in the world that we know today: expert in journalism and thinking, right? It's amazing. And I'm an expert journalist. So glad it happened. Glad we were talking about him yesterday, and glad Elon thought he was also worthy of talking about. And you got to wonder if he sort of believes this fake news, right? You just got to wonder. Before we get into stuff, I just want to share one other story, which I think is awesome. And nothing to do with Bitcoin, nothing to do with the normal stuff we talk about. But this Dallas-based startup, Colossal Biosciences, is now, they got 150 million bucks, and their business is de-extinction. They're going to create hybrids and bring back the dodo bird. They're going to bring back the Tasmanian tiger, woolly mammoth. I mean, this is amazing. How long have we been waiting for this stuff? This is great. Assalamu alaikum, Muslim Bitcoiner. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, man. So I'm waiting. I'm into this. That's all I have to say about it. I'm into it. That's the only reason why I wanted to share it with my coffee friends in the morning, that this is something I've wanted for a long time. And my kids always bring it up. So this is the weird thing. My kids, who are totally into Bitcoin, I see them telling other kids about the war, and secret money is what they've called it since they were kids. They write it on things. That's hilarious, right? But they're what I've always told them. When they ask, what are we going to do for what I want to work with secret money when I get older, they say to me, and I say, well, it might be different by then. It might just be what you get paid for. I don't think you have to promote it like in my era. They loved Bitcoin 2022 last year, right? So they still, can we go back to Bitcoin? Can we go back to Bitcoin is what they call it. So the point is, the job they're most interested in having is bringing unicorns back to life. And so I've always explained that it's probably possible. You could actually be the person who brings unicorns back to life if we figure out all the things that are wrong in our economy and get oriented to the cool things that we should be doing in the modern world. And one of them, I believe, when I told my kids that a viable job for them in the future is the repopulation of unicorns in the world. As bizarre and weird as it sounds, but this Colossal Biosciences is going to help me not be a liar with my own kids. I think they can actually see them in their life, right? So there you go. That's happening. That's in the news. That's a real thing. 150 million bucks. I'm interested. Totally interested. So the most interesting thing I came across today was from Kanekoa Substack, and he had been Kanekoa the Great, I think is what he's called on Twitter. Kanekoa the Great, and he's got a Substack. I followed him before. I've mentioned him on this show before. He was involved with that whole thing yesterday with, what was his name again? The thread we discussed yesterday. I can't remember the name of it right now. Not as easy when I don't have my notes organized the way I like. Anyway, the war clandestine, right? The whole thing that went viral yesterday that we discussed, that was that's still getting discussed today. So Kanekoa was a part of that, and he really a little string of thoughts on Google today, those, because they were more than fascinating. So here's what's up: Kanekoa.substack.com. Kanekoa the Great. On the Google leaks, which actually happened in 2019. And if you remember, that was around the time when they had fired that fella for opposing some of the gender stuff going on and some of the agenda stuff going on. And he ended up becoming a pretty big deal, that guy who they had, the Zach Voorhees guy. And a lot of people wrote about that at the time. It was sort of a proto Twitter files. It was the first time we'd had a peek behind the curtain about how all these wizards were organizing people's lives. And so Kaneko the Great just did a really interesting breakdown of it, and mentions a little bit about what Elon should think about with Twitter files going forward, or another format to do them in. So here's what he says. In 2019, 950 pages of Google's internal documents leaked, providing evidence of Google's use of blacklists and machine learning algorithms to censor conservatives and populists. These are the type of source documents Elon Musk should release. So he's talking about these source documents. So just talking about how big it is, right? It's 2.3 billion users. That's YouTube. Google has 5.6 billion daily searches. And then he starts the story. In 2021, former Google soft Zachary Voorhees published a book where he explained that the turning point was the election of Donald Trump. The morning after the election, employees cried, lost their minds, and planned their resistance. Google co-founder Sergey Brin said in an all-hands company meeting, we've already known this, right? I certainly find this election deeply offensive, and I know that many of you do too. Many people apparently don't share the values we have. Kent Walker, Google's chief legal officer, suggested Trump voters were motivated by fear, xenophobia, hatred. He described how the company would take on the rise of populism and nationalism. In many ways, Google did lose the 26 election to Trump. Eric Schmidt gave Hillary Clinton's team campaign a full year before she announced to run for president. Schmidt was the head outside advisor to the campaign, so he was literally totally involved in it. The Clinton campaign's chief tech officer and chief product officer came from Google, so she was already staffing from there. It goes on to just show more connections, right? And here he just goes on more about how they funded them, and then after how they helped suppress a Project Veritas story even back then, right? And because Project Veritas had caught one of these people on camera, or in their secret camera thing, right? Their Cheaters type TV show, which we're fans of. Remember, we are fans of the show, right? We're fans of the sting operations. But you've got to understand that they're all mostly entertainment. Even if they break big news and break big consequential events, right? We still watch them for the entertainment. So here's where they talk about training their algorithms there. And here's where things start to get weird, right? YouTube CEO described how Google uses machine learning and classifiers to bury trashy news and promote authoritative views. Well, I don't have to get into his explanation of machine learning. So they go on about new classifiers and all kinds of things. But here's where things get super, super interesting. They define a few fringe searches and mention humans training their censorship AI, followed by a flowchart that says people are programmed, right? So this flowchart that I've copied here is actually from Google. Oh, I don't know if you can see it. One second. Doesn't say, how do I get that? Let me just show you. See where it says in the bottom, people programmed? Can you see that? How is that not going? There we go. People are programmed. So, oh, there we go. Yeah. So people are programmed. That's from Google's own documents here, right? And this is the actual flowchart that they shared. This is their explanation out in the open of what they do, right? So here's what it is. They more or less say that you get this training data harvested, and with this function here, you can make people think anything you want, right? As long as you control the algorithms, you make sure the training data that's harvested is the good stuff. And the media filters are really what their whole role is here, right? So as long as this media filter piece functions the way they intend for it to function, they can make you think whatever they want. They're basically telling you here that you're just another function in their machine, and they can predict outcomes. If they can predict outcomes, what does it say about free will? What a lot of things, right? It sort of changes your perception of the world if you stop and look at it, because this is what we talk about on the show all the time, right? The operating system is this. You can't change it, right? They figured this out and they know it. It's a fact, right? We are all susceptible. Just like I mentioned earlier about Joe, I trust your brain, Nolan. Look, I am part of this too. There's no avoiding it. Every human being is a part of it. Now, you can mobilize against it, and that's what we're going to talk about today, right? There's defensive positions you can take and all that stuff, but most of us, it's all day, all the time. So you can't constantly understand when things are infiltrating because of narrative bias, and you want to believe things, and all those other reasons, right? And especially the way this functions, right? You can see the model just based on what they were discussing around the Trump election, right? What it really is you take that moment of alertness where you have to save yourself, right? It's where we show persuasion functioning. The survival mechanism kicks in, especially when the consequential that the cause and effect is put into your brain beforehand and suggested, if you do this and that happens, you will be in danger. So right when that happens, your brain will spring into reflexively survival mode. And what we see here is this constant black and white situation. It could be the pure form race, right? The constant barrage of race-based stories we see as a worldview, right? I mean, we're not hiding the fact that intersectionalists and most of those people think in terms of race for their worldview. The whole thing is seen through a race lens, right? History, all of it, right? It's all seen through that lens, and it is one of these, opposites, black and white situations. And you can see we talk about the fake prison of two ideas, the Greg Gutfeld idea on this show a lot, how the uniparty in American politics, the Democrat and Republicans really do function off of and are able to stay in power in the way they have been by using this fake prison of two ideas, as if the only two solutions to a problem are the yes and no to whatever recent policy plan has been suggested, right? So global warming, it's go green or cut consumption, right? It isn't build new energy systems and use way more energy than you ever used and manage it much better. Like that's not really on the table as far as the mainstream media. We know in real life that's on the table, right? The third option has been before us for a long time, right? We've been talking about it. It's there. Um, so, um, so you get this whole, training data harvested more or less is what's going on, right? You train people to see the world in the terms that you want to see them on, right? You just put a version of reality that has binaries in front of them, and they're going to see the world in terms of those binaries. And from that point, that's when you engage the brain chemical system in the brain where addiction comes from, where habits form. That's where you get to the dopamine hits, the oxytocin, the serotonin, the endorphins, the stuff we've talked about regularly on this show. That's how habits end up getting formed. That's how rewards are doled out to your person, right? That's how you end up doing it. So this is very people addicted to phones and screens for that reason, right? You ideas, and then bang, you put them in this context where they'll reward them making away, they'll reward themselves for seeing the world in a certain way. How many Americans were mobilized to fight Nazism because they opposed Trump? Many, right? And to this day, I still think the people who hate Trump the most are, in their own way, great Americans, right? And like you should hate Nazis, right? Of course you should. Now, they never get to the question whether they're hating Nazis for real, right? Of course not. But because they're so convinced that those people are Nazis, they're doing the thing they've been trained for from the beginning as Americans, to hate fascism and all. So they're still behaving as good Americans. They're just misled and totally on the wrong path, right? So we still forgive all of these people who are brainwashed and don't really understand what it is they're doing, because this is some tricky stuff, right? And especially when Google enters the equation here, and this is where they enter the equation, right? The media filtering, and that's where they can push stuff up, deprioritize. You should see the accounts they deprioritize. So it's Stephen Crowder, Michelle Malkin, all kinds of names that you would recognize, And I bet Bitcoin stuff. I mean, how many times has Bitcoin stuff just been completely wiped off of the the site on YouTube? I mean, all the time, right? I remember in 2020, was it 2019 into 2020? Every single YouTube account, every single YouTube video ever about Bitcoin was erased, all of them overnight, right? All the big channels erased. Some were reinstated, but this was a huge, huge purge. Now, we were creating content at the time at Coindesk, and we lost a bunch of it that day. Some of it came back, right? Now, remember at Bitcoin 2022 in Miami, we had a really famous session exposing a lot of what was going on in African banks. And to this day, it's amazing. I continue to say it's incredible that I had no idea, that I learned at Bitcoin 2022 what was going on with the French central bank and African uh, money issuance. Right? I did. I went to school. I went to the fanciest university in France. I speak complete French, total French. Great, right? Um, France is a part of my life. I've lived there. I go there pretty often. I follow its history really well, closely. I follow its politics. I follow what's going on there. It's a type of home for me, and I had no idea. Like I had one of the best educations you can get, and I had no clue what was going on with Africa and the central banks. And I had worked in central bank law, in a sense, through the Senate Banking Committee in Canada. So, in theory, I should have known about all of this stuff. I mean, I should have known about it all. And so, right away, it was strange to me that I was learning such new and important information live on stage. Well, guess what happened? Guess what happened to Bitcoin Magazine's YouTube channel during Bitcoin 2022? It was completely wiped out. They took every video down. Everything we've ever done was erased. Now, luckily, Jack Dorsey was a fan of the video that we had created that day on our stage with someone from Africa who had divulged all this. She was there with Young Mi Park, the North Korean dissident, who explained all the experiences she had with money and the debasement of it with her fascist homeland. And so it was a pretty moving session, and it went viral after Jack Dorsey retweeted a clip from it about this African banking situation, again, which was news to me, right? Unbelievably news to me. And what ended up happening was, like I said, YouTube completely suppressed our channel. We didn't get it back to the next morning, but that whole night, we had no more YouTube channel. I mean, 100,000 subscribers, which is a real channel, right? When you get to the 100,000 subscribers, you get the plaque and you get the this and da 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 da. We were there, and didn't matter, right? It didn't matter. Now, it was a tripwire. I learned a little bit about what it wasn't one of these, oh, they're releasing secrets about Africa. It wasn't that, right? But nevertheless, just to show you how the machine worked, to show you how the media was filtered. What we understood was, talking about it the next day, and people who were discussing it with Google said, well, we would produce so many videos. There were so many triggering things on all of our stages, on all of that content, that it broke the machine and it suppressed our whole channel. We'd had too many violations basically within a too short period of time, and they just cancel us. Again, we're big enough, we could fight it. We had the whole world watching that morning. We had Michelle Phan on our news desk in that morning, huge account, who says this is ridiculous. And so we were going to make a bigger issue about it than it was. So it all came back. It was like it never happened, right? Very few people even noticed. I noticed. Most people working at Bitcoin Magazine, of course, noticed. It was panic that night. Can you believe they had done such a thing, right? But they had, and it is still to this day my contention that it was the viral video about Africa that was the triggering event, right? Because it did have a lot of amplification that day. It was a big deal. It was real news, unbelievably, even for someone like myself who should have known. I should have known, right? There's no way I couldn't have known this. So it was news to me. So that whole situation here, this flowchart, is basically Google admitting they know exactly how to program a brain. This is their model for doing it, and this is where they interject as an operator, right? This media filtration thing, and then they can fine tune all of this business, right? And then of course get their desired result, right? They can get their desired result. Now, here's another interesting thing. Well, we'll get to that. It's about Google itself, the name. But first, what I want to mention, right? So just remember that, right? So remember how this flowchart functions. Remember how they openly admit to programming brains. They openly admit it, right? Which is fine, right? You can openly admit it, but people have to know that they're dealing with people who understand they are using mind tricks to get you to do what they want. Right? You have to know that these folks know that they can get you to do what they want, right? So fast forward, right? Fast forward to it's the stupid order. Um, Austin Herbert, a Bitcoiner, on Twitter yesterday, gave a thread and the predictions of the book A Sovereign Individual. So I'm going to take those now, that thread, and I'm going to relate it to how this flowchart, which is, we're not changing the flowchart. We're going to show how it operates with Bitcoin, right? So it's the same flowchart. It's the same flowchart. So here's what Sovereign Individual says, right? Just gives a brief exploration, a brief summary of the book, explores the impact of technological change on individuals, economies, and society. The rise of digital technology and globalization enables individuals to become sovereign, with the ability to protect their assets, secure privacy, and take advantages of new opportunities. Of course, written in 1997, right? So 10 predictions from the authors. We don't need to go over all of them because as Bitcoiners, I think we inherently understand a lot of them, right? Peer-to-peer transactions enabled by technology, financial intermediaries removed. An important one, the shift of power from nation states to individuals, corporations, and supranational entities. I think we're in that world now, right? Nation states not too powerful. Decline of nation states currencies, the potential for offshore tax havens, right? We all see that stuff. But here's the important parts right here of the predictions, right? Here they are. The need to be proactive in protecting personal assets and information in an increasingly interconnected world. So when they say protect personal assets and information, he might mean personal information, sure, right? But you can also imagine that this is just protecting information that comes in to your brain as well, right? It's not just what you've already got in there that you've got to protect. You've got to protect what can come in, right? So that's one of the only solutions to this form of brainwashing is to reject it and keep it away from you. So he then says the growing trend towards e-commerce and the decline of traditional brick and mortar retail. So again, the connection here is information going into your brain and interconnect protection. But there's these new trends with commerce against your traditional brick and mortar stuff. And then he says the rise of new forms, remote work, gig economy, and the impact on forms of employment. And all of that taken together, right? All of that taken together just means that because this information stuff coming from this system, right, which is selling you safety and security with their binary worldview, right, is doing such a bad job at actually keeping you safe and secure that they've opened a massive front for change to occur, right? They've opened a massive front for change to occur. Here's what it looks like, right? Yesterday on CBS, right? Yesterday on CBS, you had, what's her name? Yasmin something, something, something. Right? Yasmin on, oh, sorry, even better, MSNBC, right? She's on MSNBC. Sorry, I thought she was on CBS. So she comes out and says she has this myocarditis thing, right? And she gives the whole story. She says, well, it's really sad. You know, I was a runner and then I started getting this thing and I couldn't do anything over the Christmas holidays. My husband took me to the doctor. They found out my heart was swollen with fluid. I used to run miles 3 or 4 times a day, 3 to 4 times a week, 7 or 8 miles, like a real runner, right? And then she goes through a whole ordeal about going to the doctors, her health has changed, what's going on, right? So here's what the doctors tell her, right? And this is the story she brings on MSNBC. They said that her myocarditis, Yasmin Vozugian, MSNBC host, right, develops myocarditis. She can't run anymore. I even thought she had a bit of the old Bell's palsy when she was talking. I saw some crooked face, but maybe I'm wrong. Could have been plastic surgery. Who knows, right? She just looked like she had a bit of a crooked Bell's palsy, which is another one of the symptoms, unfortunately. So myocarditis. This is what she blames it on. This is what the doctor told her, and this is what she put on the news after telling her whole story. She said she got a cold. She got a cold, and it gave her myocarditis. Colds give myocarditis now. Maybe. I'm not. I don't know. Maybe. It just sounds pretty ridiculous, but that's what she said on the air, right? So right away, we're dealing with a situation where we know we don't trust these folks anymore, right? We're getting there. The safety and security issue is now really not the place you go to look. And in some ways, Michael Schellenberger did a whole breakdown yesterday as well of the Trump Russia collusion now that we know so much more. And what he did was he broke down this article written by a 78-year-old fella, 75-year-old fella, 78-year-old fella, Jeff Girth, won a Pulitzer Prize, worked at the New York Times between 1976 and 2005, right? So Michael Schellenberger breaks down this fella's article describing the journalistic malfeasance and failure around the Trump Russiagate thing. Right? And here's what he says. So he goes through everyone, right? All the people that said this thing was stupid, and he gives a Matt Taibbi. Matt Taibbi is a part of the story. He says, Matt Taibbi said, they wouldn't let us look at things, and if we didn't have the right answer that fit with their narrative, we were just fired, basically. He goes, Matt Taibbi said more neutral approach to reporting went completely out the window once Trump got elected. Saying anything publicly about the story that did not align with the narrative, the repercussions were huge for any of us that did not go there, which is crazy. And just goes through all of these different press folks that were working with the national security apparatus, right? And shaping opinion about the Russia collusion story. And his conclusion here is interesting, right? He says, let's see, these were all the ones I got to kick out in my form. So he goes, one frequent catchphrase people or person familiar with is widely used by many journalists. The Times used it over 1,000 times to describe the Russia collusion case. The last executive director I worked for, Bill Keller, so this is this guy, Jeff, writing, right? The last executive director I worked for, Bill Keller, told staff repeatedly that the phrase was so vague it could even mean the reporter. I reached out to more than 60 journalists, and about half responded. Of those who did, more than a dozen agreed to be interviewed on the record. However, not a single major news organization made available a newsroom leader to talk about their coverage. Right. So this is a guy who's 70 years old, who just goes in and describes all of the terrible things that went on, and makes a conclusion. Right. I've avoided. So he had never in 50 years given his own opinion. Right. This writer. I've avoided opining for more than 50 years as a reporter, but this time I felt obliged to weigh in. Why? Because I'm worried about journalism's declining credibility and society's increasing polarization, right? So what they've done here with these training data sets and understanding that they can engage a survival mechanism through showing a fake prison of two ideas and binaries, that although it was clear that the dogs came to feed, right, that you could train them to give you your paw, and humans will be motivated by these dose, right, the dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin, endorphins. But then if you filter the media, you can actually make this a loop and really rile people up, right? So what he's saying is enough people now, right, have rejected any form of this programming because of the lack of trust in the way they handled the Mueller-Trump thing. And I still remember saying at the end of 2020 election, when it went the way it went, I didn't care about the election. We're not going to get through this issue in about 2016 openly, without triggering people, without angry and falling into their cognitive dissonance corners, split along this binary of two ideas, right? So that right away was wide as the must-have conversation in America for us to start getting what's going on. And this writer is basically admitting the truth. The amount of people who have been turned off by media's behavior in this file and everything that's come after is enough for us to start really changing things, right? It is enough. And especially the way the Sovereign Individual book describes how the world is changing right now. Think about it. It's about protecting yourself from information, new forms of commerce, and the like, right? Well, Tucker Carlson did his show last night, if you didn't catch it, on the egg problem, right? The egg prices going up. And if you saw this weekend, there was another huge egg factory, I guess, 100,000 chickens there laying eggs that burnt down. We haven't heard any reason why. There's been absolutely zero explanation for it. No one's seemingly investigating it. We've seen it on Twitter. Now, these stories have been going on for a while, and it's not the first time Tucker Carlson has covered the story of what's going on in the food supply. Now, I will say the time he did it last year, I looked into some of the stuff. There was one of the ones on the list of places that have had trouble was here in Barbados, and I looked into it. It was like a little fire in our supermarket. It was no big deal. So yeah, no, but that one's fake. I saw that one too. That was going around yesterday. I was gonna put that in today, but I have to. I got to do a quick look before I uh, choose fake news of the day, and that one, unfortunately, I wished it was true, but I looked into it. It was fake. It was totally Photoshop, it's still funny. But I agree. So so the whole story with the food and Tucker is he went through other ones that are going on right now and why no one's talking about it. He brought new information that I didn't know about. There was a story about Joe Biden last year as well, where he gave a speech out in the open and he said, this is his exact quote. All right, now we know Biden, the brain, right? So it's true. We don't need to hold him to everything he says, but this is what he says, right? He says, how we could increase and disseminate more rapidly food shortages, right? So he says that. How we could increase and disseminate more rapidly food shortages. So he says he's talking about how to strategically create food shortages, right? And so no one asked him about it, right? So this happened. No one asked him about it. Finally, someone did, and Facebook checked it as fake news, saying, no, he never said that. But he said it, right? So even if you're asking him to clarify, did you mean the opposite or did you mean that, right? Obviously, you would assume he means the opposite, but he actually just said that, right? So Tucker goes on to say, well, why didn't anyone ask about it, right? And then he's going into this new thing that people are noticing online about chickens not laying eggs anymore. Right. So what's going on with the chickens? Now, here's a few things I'll say about the chickens and the eggs. This chicken egg situation could absolutely be nothing, right? It could just be confirmation bias, narrative bias, people seeing something and then reporting. Chickens lay fewer eggs in the winter, so it's normal that chickens don't lay many eggs in the winter. A bunch of people saying it's the feed, right? That's sort of the story going around. There's something wrong with the chicken feed. Chickens aren't laying eggs as much. What I'll say, from what I saw, because I don't buy eggs at a store and I haven't for a long time, I buy eggs from farmers. Notice when I left Vermont was eggs were becoming harder to find, even from the little farms, right? The eggs were becoming harder to find from the little farms, and I would go around. Some places would have them, and it's not like it was that hard. I have 4 or 5 farms I can time and see what they've got. In Vermont, a lot of people just have their garden shed out front, and it's an honor system. There's no cashier or anything. You just go in, and there's prices, and you pay and walk out, right? These are kind of everywhere, right, on farms. So, it's just a question of stop at this one, stop at the next one, and, some would have eggs and some would. So I never went without, for sure. But it was like a problem to solve regularly. And I would ask all the farmers, what's going on? What do you say? What they all said was the same thing, right? Nothing to do with feed at the time. That story hadn't come. They all said the same thing. It was just a lag on inflation. The feed costs were too high, and they culled some chickens earlier. And now they said that there was no more import from Canada because they got into this fight about avian flu. Apparently, they had to kill a bunch of birds in America because they had the flu, and then some in Canada. So it's true, as someone who crossed the Canadian-US border regularly, they would police eggs. They started to police eggs at the border, right? They said no eggs, avian flu, blah blah blah. I hadn't really heard about the avian flu, nor had any of the farmers in Vermont. But the supply should have come down to Vermont and wasn't. So that was one of the explanations. That could be one of the explanations for the U.S. trouble in general. I think a lot of eggs do come from Canada. Now that they aren't crossing the border, you're probably noticing it in the supplies. So that's one explanation, right? Just one explanation. Now, I'm not here to tell you what's actually going on with eggs, right? I don't know, right? My theory is it's going to be something like a lag in inflation effects, right? Called flocks because of what's going on and less eggs, and maybe there will be some connection to food. I don't know, right? It could be. But here's where I'm going to tie it back to what's going on um, with keeping you safe, keeping you secure, keeping you happy, right? The same story. Now, the chicken one is exactly the same as this other story, which is about beef, right? Did you know that the US beef herd is the lowest, smallest it's been since 1962? Right, this is from the Associated Press yesterday, and it's really about the futures markets. They're really I got this from futures markets writing. This is not. This isn't just the unsentimental people, right? This is not in the dramatic media. What are we doing about peace on earth? This is just this is just the financial media, right, from Chicago. Chicago, January 31st. You know, Chicago is the great commodities trading market of the world, right? Much larger market than the New York Stock Exchange. Everything is traded there. And beef futures, the whole concept of these futures for food and everything comes from that venue, right? The great early beef herds in America, in the West and Midwest and all that, were traded on that market. The rest of the world never knew anything about beef consumption in the way that Americans showed the world how to consume beef. That didn't exist before, right? It's totally new what Americans have done, eating cow beef on this scale, right? That was not a thing. To this day, if you go to Europe, they don't eat beef like we do in America. It's a lot of pork, a lot of other stuff. So here's the article. The U.S. beef cow herd dropped to its lowest level since 1962, U.S. Department of Agricultural data showed on Tuesday, with a severe drought raised costs for livestock feed. Ranchers increasingly sent cows to slaughter last year instead of keeping them to reproduce, as dry weather reduced the amount of pasture available for grazing in the western United States and on the plains. At the same time, a tight labor market limited slaughtering at meat packing plants. And here are the numbers, right? So there's 28.9 million beef cows as of January 1st. So it's almost 4% down, which is the lowest size in the country, right? The total number of cattle and calves, so that includes dairy, is also down 3%. So, and here's what they say. Cattle producers will not make meaningful progress in rebuilding the U.S. herd until 2025 at the earliest. And here's the kicker, guys. Meanwhile, restaurants and retailers and importers will increasingly compete for limited supplies of U.S. beef, the firm added. And the headline is, there's no relief in sight, right? So no relief in sight for beef prices. Now, the beef shortage sounds a little bit like the shortage in eggs that I just mentioned. So some inflation troubles, right? You can't keep as much of the herd. We saw that regenerative farmer who was on Joe Rogan before Christmas describing the same thing, like those cows that they had to slaughter during COVID because of all the shutdowns, or because the animals simply can't, they're so unhealthy, the factory farmed animals, they can't live longer than their prescribed time of slaughter, right? So this is also one of those stories about the beef where and even the eggs, guys, honestly, right? You don't always know the difference between good news and bad news. That's a Mark Twain observation, right? Humans can't tell the difference sometimes between good news and bad news. And what I mean by that is, I'm anti-industrial farming. This is industrial farming issues writ large, right? The cows they're describing are not the cows that Justin is talking about eating, right? They're not the same cows, right? These are factory-fed, factory-raised cattle that they're getting these huge numbers from. So if that whole system is having trouble, I can't say it's necessarily a bad thing in the long run. Just like if factory eggs are in trouble, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? This is the whole good news and bad news. We can't tell the difference. Oops, nope. is a home phone here that never rings, and I've never given out the number, so who knows who is ringing? But it's often a wrong number. Anyway, so the this idea of food scarcity. Now, bring it back to the sovereign individual, right? We talked about information. We talked about being getting and protecting sources of information and all those things. So in the end, Bitcoin, and here's where the real difference comes. You know what Google actually is? You know what it means? Google is where they got their name for Google, right? Google is the highest number we can sort of intellectualize and contemplate, right? Before infinity. It's the largest number. If you took the weight of an atom, and it's 10 to the 100, I think, something like that. So it's the largest number we can think about, right? It's literally the largest number we can think about. That's where they got the name from, right? Google is a number almost beyond. Like I said, it's 10 to the 100, but it's not really that. It's this idea of conceiving a number that is still real and the mind can articulate, but it's not infinity, right? So it's not infinity, but it's the hugest, largest number you can imagine, right? And that's where this training data set stuff, weirdly, they're the largest number. It's a confusopoly. It's all the numbers in the world, yet they're just going to try and turn everything into binaries and black and white and ones and zeros, right? So it's a pretty amazing comparison that Google is literally the largest number, but just sitting there, right? Good luck. Whereas Bitcoin, about the training data harvested, it really just comes back to that count it, and therefore, because we can count it at 21 million, we can reference the universe next to it. It now has a measuring stick. That's a major difference, but it's almost inverted, right? It's almost inverted. It's take two things over infinity, right? Or the largest number in the world. So this becomes 2 over 10 to the 100, right? And just to show you the type of confusopoly that's going on, right? It makes no sense. It's just everything in the world, and we're going to show it to you in binaries. Whereas Bitcoin says we have a measuring stick of this much, and therefore now we can measure everything against it easily, right? So from there, you get this dose thing, right? But because they're using the survival mechanism all the time, what do you get, right? You get the high time preference, right? You get people who simply just want a hit, a dopamine kick now, immediately, today, give it to me. Now compare that to Bitcoin, right? What are we actually trying to do with infinity over 21 million? In the end, that is a time preference situation, right? That is essentially suggesting that because we can now contemplate everything in the world under these very simple denominator, we can have more appetite for doing things right, getting it better, getting it right. It's not just the instant hit, right? So that's why there is such a huge accent on time preference in Bitcoin. It's not a little thing, it's everything, right? Once you change that mindset, once you actually rechange the algorithm, right? And that becomes the algorithm that your brain is functioning off of. If it's trying to survive from day to day, navigating a race war, navigating all these health traps that people say are around you, right? You can get a cold and then get myocarditis and all these things, right? It's going to be tough, right? It's going to be tough. So you need to sort of live on the edge in that live for the moment type of situation, right? And then, of course, we all understand that this centralized nature of Google and all the other partners in the media apparatus that work with it, they're kind of stuck there. We're not dealing with that, right? We are, of course, dealing with a P2P network. So it's the same format. It's the same brain we're comparing, right? But we're changing the data. We're changing the algorithms, right? We're going from low time preference to high time preference, or high time preference to low time preference, right? We're changing the way media is actually filtered, right? It's not really well filtered in a decentralized network where everyone is equal and peers. Not the same situation, right? And so in the end, you're producing literally different people, right? They're not the same person from then on, right? They're just not the same person. So yeah, it's this is the whole game. This is Google against Bitcoin. The same brain, system, right? The same persuasion filter is being used. Its parts are totally different. The component parts are totally different, right? Um, so there you go. There you go. Different world, and we're producing new things. And now let's take it back to the sovereign individual piece for a second, right? So go back to the sovereign individual piece. So when I said protect information, when I said new forms of commerce, right? And I said all that bad news apparently about the eggs and the cows, and we have the smallest herd ever. And I said there's a confusion maybe about good news from bad news. Well, here it is, right? As Bitcoiners, as Bitcoiners, we understand the answers to this is literally exactly like in the sovereign individual, new forms of information and new businesses that aren't brick and mortar, which means the ancillary cartel to the banking cartel, the grocery cartel, as insidious and dangerous as the banking cartel, believe it or not, uh, is now actually got a credible opponent. And that's Bitcoiners. That's Justin and his newsletter on how to source food from farmers directly, how to make wise decisions in food. That's why the whole food thing is so big in Bitcoin. That's why food and nutrition literacy is such a huge subject. It's not this, get tricked into surviving today, right? This is a long term change in how food is distributed and where we get information about nutrition. So, just like Michael Schellenberger pointed out, right, they threw the baby out with the bathwater with the Trump Russia thing, right? All of this system has now broken down. They're losing people and capacity at every moment. And more people are shifting over to a more beneficial model that does the same thing, right? It's training data, right? It's algorithms being processed, but with a change in time preference, with an orientation towards health, it produces different people. And luckily, Bitcoiners are sharing this information on Nostr and everywhere, right? This is the stuff we talk about. This is what we'll talk about at Bitcoin 2023. There'll be all kinds of diet stuff, as there always is, right? We're always very interested in food and nutrition and all of those things. And so we're literally creating new forms of information distribution, protecting information as far as your nutrition and health goes, and creating important new forms of commerce. You got Texas Slim, who is out there with the beef initiative. I'm going to try and bring the beef initiative to Vermont next summer. I've tried to get to it this past summer and meet a few people. I met a couple of ranchers and all that, but haven't been able to really focus on it. But next summer, right, we're going to keep meeting more ranchers. We don't really have ranches. That's the wrong way, I guess, in Vermont, right? It's just beef farms and dairy farms. So there you go, right? New forms of commerce, sovereign individual thesis in play. Bitcoiners can literally program better people, and that's going to help us win, right? Blast the like button with your laser eyes, guys. Do it, do it, do it. Tell me how the sound was today. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about this new mic. I didn't like the way it sounded yesterday when I re-listened. Had some cracking and Rice Krispie stuff going on. Tell me how it's going though. That was probably Chief calling. Yeah. Google is calling. Yeah. Sorry about that. McTimmy, I had 3 hens, but the city rats liked the chicken feed, and the city didn't like my free range techniques. Good for you, McTimmy. Good for you. Great show, and the new mic is decent. I need a new one. We'll see. This is all they had on the island that would work for me now. It might just be a bar thing. I think if I get it closer to my mouth like this, it's low on the table, so maybe I'll try and find a way to jack it up closer to my mouth, and it could get better. I'm not done trying this mic. I just think I need to get a new system here. What does Dex say? Used to have chickens. They stopped laying as much a couple of years before this. Guess it took a while to catch up everywhere else. Yeah, they're using the eggs to make viruses. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, this one's good, eh, Joe? Isn't it funny? A cold. It's pretty sad seeing, honestly. You see her, and I'm telling you, she's got the Bell's palsy too. I don't care what she wasn't comfortable saying it because it means maybe to her mind the end of her career. But I could see her like this. She was talking and like it's a little crooked. Maybe she. I mean, I don't want to. I'm not an anti. Bell's palsy people. I got no problems. Right? It sucks, but it doesn't bug me. So, all right, team. Yeah, audio didn't cut out or skip today. And he says closer does sound a little better. Good. Yeah. Okay. So maybe I'll get a bar for in front of my because it's got this little stand, right? It's not bad. It sits on my desk, but we can do better. Still get the lag. Hmm. Well, maybe we'll try. All right, we'll work on it. Okay, team. Peace. Have a